Today, I'd like to talk a bit about relationships and how they are the perfect mirror for yourself, and how being in relationships and the quality of your relationships is directly correlated with how you feel about yourself when you're alone, when you're only by yourself. In my past years, I've gone through different stages of, let's say, evolution, for lack of a better word. In this process of self-discovery, I realized that who I was surrounded by, through some sort of a magic, knew exactly where I was not free. In what sense not free? In the sense that I didn't want to be exposed in those specific ways. And those people who were around me, with whom I had a certain kind of relationship, be it working relationship, partnership, um, father-child relationship, these relationships grew me more than anything else I've done alone, let's say through just tuning into podcasts or reading books and so on. Because learning in isolation is ultimately not possible, right? It's one thing to read something and have it make sense, like parenting book, for example, where someone tells you exactly how they did in order to make their child behave in a certain way, or um, raise them with some sort of values and so on. And it's nice to read someone's opinion about stuff that you ultimately care about as well. But the moment you assume that the theory is directly applicable to your own situation, to real life, you will typically get a rather big slap uh, from reality, right? Um, so I resisted quite a while at the beginning the seemingly negative influence that people had on my own journey of growth, right? Because it seemed like I was making progress, I was learning stuff, but then whenever I tried to apply that in my life, or whenever I tried to talk with someone about what I was learning, um, people were at best non-interested most of the times. Rarely it happened that I learned something deeply meaningful to me, and then I shared it with someone, and then that person, be it my wife or a friend or someone from my family, a close member of my family, was deeply moved by my discovery. No one really said, wow, it's amazing, man, only if I would have learned that sooner. And that intrigued me for a while. And at the beginning, I even took it personal. I said, okay, clearly you don't care about my help ultimately, right? Because I'm telling you something about yourself that you should care about, and it helps you. Look, it helped me. But the more time passed, the more I realized that that was simply my own projection on people, right? My own need to feel appreciated and valued for something that, yes, was helpful for me, but ultimately was not that useful for anyone else, simply because they were not in the place where that information made sense, or in a place where they could directly apply what I learned in their life in that moment. So after a bit of frustration, it it appeared to me that in the end, their reaction was ultimately necessary for me, because it was the next stage for me to be okay with people's rejection, in a way, right? And when I say rejection, I mean rejection of an idea, which ultimately, if you care enough about that idea, that rejection is a rejection of self. I felt rejected. It was just an idea that I read in a book 2 days ago. But because I integrated it so deeply and I valued it a lot and it made sense for me a lot, whenever people rejected that idea, I took it personal. And I realized that this is ultimately the source of most human unhappiness caused by relationships or caused from relationships. And I would go to the extent of saying that most people unhappiness is caused by relationships overall. And not only by relationships in general, but by this very mechanism that I just described. We go about in life cultivating, without anyone's approval, our own view of the world, our own understanding about how things work, based on trial and error, right? Sometimes someone tells you something without them paying attention to how that thing might impact you. Then you take that onto yourself, you put it into practice, you get some positive result out of it, and then you take that for granted in the sense that you replicate the same kind of thing, the same exercise, um, the same act, the same behavior in life, and you take it on yourself, you assume it. Then you start to accumulate things. Then you start to accumulate knowledge. You start to accumulate possessions, like physical, material possessions, right? You start to develop this sense of self that you identify yourself with. Who I am, why I'm like that, what I believe in, right? My religious stake, my political position, my view of whether this is an extreme example, but to a point it's relevant, whether the earth is flat or not, right? And then everything that makes sense for you gives you this sense of peace of mind, right? You don't have to think about it that much anymore. This is who I am, right? I am this party, political party. I am of the opinion that the earth is round or the earth is flat. I am Christian, or I'm a Muslim, or I am whatever, right? And then all these I ams, all these things that you attach after I am, these are identity statements. So whenever you make identity statements and you make them more and more, they become part of you. So how are then relationships most challenging to your own identity? Well, it so happens that not everyone, or rather said, that virtually no one else in this world shares the exact same data set of stuff that make up your own identity. It so happens that no matter how many things we have in common, there is an important mismatch between what you take for granted and what I take for granted. There is a virtually infinite number of ways in which we can contradict each other in terms of arguments that we can sustain for ourselves ultimately, right? I have my own arguments to preserve my own identity, to try to convince you that I am right against what you believe to be right for yourself. And why do I try to do that? Because if it turns out that what I believe in is not real, then in a way, I'm not real. In a way, I am a lie, right? The things that I believe in are not true. So if they are not true, what does this tell about me? So I think human relationships are best at exposing this kind of way in which we are not free, right? In which we cling to this self-made, ultimately, identity that we take for ourselves. And it took me quite a few years, or I would say it's still my biggest project these days. But it's such a beautiful project now, because now I realize what's happening behind the scenes, right? Whenever I believe deeply into a certain idea or a way of doing things because it works for me, and I feel this urge to share it with others, not only not only for information purposes, but clearly with the hidden intention of having them see what I'm seeing, I try to catch myself as soon as possible. Because not only I violate in a way others' right to think different things, but I isolate myself. I become more rigid by, instead of being curious to what they have to say on a topic that I care about, I try to convince them of something just because it makes sense for me. So this is a very sad way to live, because it robs you from the joy of discovering something that is even paradoxical or completely different in terms of point of view, right? In terms of way of viewing things, in terms of perspective of the world than you have. And after enough research, you will realize that no matter how much you believe in what you believe to be true, another person's opinion about the same thing, even if it's less educated, it's not less true for that person, right? For that person, that's absolute reality, that's the absolute truth. If they care to investigate enough to fool themselves into believing something which is not true, and you know better, it's still their truth. It's irrelevant. So let's take a simple example. I can argue with someone about the fact that the sun is a star, right? And they might might selectively get informed about the fact that the sun is a planet, right? They might find material on the internet. I'm pretty sure there exists. And they created this view of the world, right, in which the sun is a planet. And I know it's not, right? It's a star. And then I start to have this kind of contradiction with them. I try to convince them of something that I know it's true, so they deserve to know the truth, right? And what do they do typically? Well, people typically, when you contradict what they believe in, like what it happens when, you know, people contradict what you believe in, they get defensive, right? If you try to recollect in your in your experience in life, when did you have the last discussion with someone and you enlightened them on a topic? You know, you knew something that they didn't know, or they know it wrongly, and you told them, you know, that this is wrong, what you know, this is right, what I know, please change your mind. When did anyone happen to engage in this discussion with you and thank you for enlightening them, or, you know, saying, oh my God, thank you for telling me, because, you know, I don't know what I would have made without you telling me this. Now I'm a different person. I'm a completely new human being. No one does this, right? Why? Because even if you believe that the sun is a star, the fact that the sun is a planet is part of someone else's identity. I am of the belief that, right, the sun is a planet. So it means that if you go and tell them that actually the sun is a star, they feel threatened in a way. What? Do you want me to believe now that the sun is a star? So it means that all these people that I surround myself with in this community, where we are all believers in the fact that the sun is a planet, now I have to reject them. I have to, leave them, because if I would start now believing that the sun is a star, I would not be able to stay anymore in this community. We would not have anything anymore to talk about, right? I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating when it comes down, for example, with the flat earth community, right? The flat earth community is more or less in this situation. If you tell a flat earther that actually, the earth is not flat, it's not just a matter of objective truth. It's not just a matter of a thing being different than they believe in to be. It's about their own identity and what they leave behind by believing something this radically different for them, right? What do they leave behind? They leave behind the relationships. They leave behind other humans who would not accept them in that community if they would start believing that the earth is anything but flat. So they willingly reject information, no matter how objectively true it is, simply because they don't want to live the world they are living in, which is made of people. And they have relationships with all these people. And they care more about preserving the relationships with those people than believing, against all evidence, that the earth is not flat. Now, when it comes down to you learning stuff about yourself and about the world, of course, it's important for you to stay open to what's actually true, or what's rather closest to truth as possible, because there are very few things where we can know the absolute truth. But the fact that, for example, the earth is round is closer to truth than the fact that the earth is flat. The fact that, in terms of concepts, right, in terms of how we understand the word, or what is behind the word flat and round. Same with the sun. The sun being a star, given the concept of a star and what it means to be a star, is closer to truth than the fact that the sun is a planet, right? In terms of, again, what a planet is and what we conceptualize of it being. But we are human beings. We work a lot with concepts, with words. Ultimately, just by using words, which are abstractions in themselves, it's very difficult to pinpoint at an objective fact about reality itself as such. We are limited in our comprehension about the world, in our physical senses with which we tap into the known universe, right? So whatever we gather as data points, they are in themselves limited, even if we use instruments. So we are like blind people, right, trying to poke at the world and discover stuff about it. But when it comes down indeed to living your best life, in order to avoid paying the biggest price there is in life, which is the price of ignorance, if you are really truthful to who you are and you are devoted to you becoming the best version of yourself and learning as much as you can in life, you cannot attach to what you know in this moment in time. No matter how deep and certain you are about a certain thing, you should always leave room for changing your mind in the end, right? Against evidence, against new evidence that you can test for yourself or you can experience for yourself. So instead of being used by relationships, try to use relationships to discover things about yourself where you are not free, right? Instead of finding echo chambers in the world to confirm what you believe to be true, without further investigation of alternatives, look specifically into those or seek those dialogues which expose where you are certain of, what you are certain of, and you are not willing to change, right? Whenever someone says something to you which contradicts your own opinion about what you believe to be true, and that triggers you, that affects you, that changes your mood in a significant way, that's a perfect chance and the perfect moment to investigate what's behind that. Why do I feel like my own identity is threatened simply because this person said something about something, right? I have an opinion about something, that person contradicts my opinion, and then I feel hurt. Why? Just an opinion, just a bundle of thoughts. An opinion are just stories, some made up against real evidence, some made up purely out of fictional evidence or manufactured evidence that I now start to believe in and take for granted, take as objective truth. And when someone threatens that opinion, they're not threatening me as a human being. They're just threatening this narrative that I kept up to that point to be a good proxy for truth. So this kind of openness to the world and this kind of engaging in a curious and open-minded way people in your life gives you huge amount of data about yourself. It gives you a lot of different scenarios in which you can learn stuff about yourself, right? So instead of trying to find confirmation in the world through different people whom you can convince on stuff that you believe in, and then isolate yourself into this way of viewing things, try to go and discuss with people who are likely not on the same page as you, who will likely challenge your views of the world. Because if you are really a seeker of truth, you would not care if they challenge your views of the world. Because either you will get to learn more about why your position is true without having to defend it or convince them of anything, or they will highlight something in your reasoning where clearly you don't have a strong argument. And you can engage in that kind of discussion, not for the sake of convincing anyone about anything, but with the sake of learning something new. And another important lesson I learned in the past years is that you can learn something new from absolutely every single person that you interact with, irrespective of their background, irrespective of how well educated they are, or how much of an overlap you have in terms of interests. You can learn a lot from anyone by simply being curious, by simply being willing to listen to an opinion, to a position which is, better or worse developed than yours. You will learn stuff about why you believe that what you believe in is relevant, or you will start to realize that what you believe in is maybe subject to interpretation, right? Because if you look at it from a certain angle, then it's clearly not as crystal clear as how you framed it in your own mind. And this is also liberating when it comes down to engaging with people. For most of my life, I was scared, I guess, to discuss with people or engage in discussions where there was an important risk of exposing me to not knowing. I always thought that my value comes from me knowing stuff about stuff. I start to value less and less that aspect of knowledge, right, or of learning. There is so much information there about anything that ultimately I don't care anymore about learning about stuff. Right? Learning about stuff are just descriptions, are just ways of making sense of it in a conceptual, purely abstract way. Right? I can talk about honey, for example, for days or years even. If you don't taste honey, you have no idea what honey is ultimately, right? You can have a PhD in honey, you can talk about the texture, about the density, about whatever. You can talk about it, you can think about it a lot. But if you don't taste honey, you have no idea what it is. So the problem is, of course, that these days we are flooded with information about anything. And especially today is dangerous because with generative AI, you can invent information about virtually everything, right? You can create information out of nothing about stuff that didn't exist up to that point. You can create objects, poems, fictional characters, stories, universes of things where everything happens and no one knows about it and it's actually not real in the proper sense. And you can stay there your whole life. But that alienates us from people and from actually living with others and living in this way where we open ourselves to be challenged because we know that we will learn from that interaction. And we might also show an example to the other person of how you can actually have a conversation without taking a position on something, which is so overrated these days, right? Whenever we discuss with someone, we try to convey our own idea about it, about something that we believe in, or try to prove that we know something, try to impress someone. It's all this kind of egoistic reasoning behind it, right? I want to show him that I know stuff. I want them to believe me that whatever, right? No one cares. People only care, people only care about themselves. And you know enough about you. Why don't you start to care a lot more about everything else which is not you? Isn't it there where you have an infinite source of knowledge and learning about that person and about yourself as well? If you don't care about your own agenda, you will learn a lot about how people think and why you don't think like those people or why you think like those people. And start asking questions about your own understanding about stuff. It seems counterintuitive, but it shouldn't be. I believe that this is a more qualitative way of living life than trying to find echo chambers to confirm our narrow and limited understanding of the world. Being open, being available, being there with people, and creating ultimately the space in which they can be themselves without worrying that we will judge them, that we'll criticize them, that we will listen to them only to construct our own argument and tear them apart. I think it's the greatest gift we can make to one another. No one should feel weaker or threatened or lesser than anyone else just because they don't have the same level of education or the same rich life experience or the same amount of money. Everyone should be able to feel heard. Everyone should be able to feel special ultimately, because everyone is special, everyone is unique, and everyone is special by the very fact that they are unique. So why shouldn't we encourage self-expression in a peaceful way? right? Why don't we do more of listening and we focus a lot on keep repeating and keep talking about stuff that we believe to be true? This is my project. I will spend a lot more time in listening mode, in listening without judging, without forming an opinion while I'm listening, without taking a stance on something all the time, without convincing anyone of anything. I just want to be this space in which people can discover themselves, in which people give themselves the chance to actually listen and hear themselves in a way which is non-judgmental, which is very special for a lot of people, right? Most people don't say anything because they feel threatened, because they feel that they don't have a valid point, because they feel lesser than, because whatever. And there is so much trapped potential in people simply because they isolate themselves from the world and not give themselves the gift to share a beautiful way of, or a unique way of looking at things with the entire world. I think this is a precious thing. Being open to be criticized, being open to be vulnerable, being open to have your own idea and not be influenced by everyone is a superpower, right? Because you start to develop your sense of self-worth. You respect more and more your own decisions against the popular decision. You trust yourself more with your own intuition, and you start to assume more the outcome of your own decisions. And you want that responsibility. You claim it for yourself. You want to have this kind of control. And I think that comes with simply maturity and realizing that there is virtually nothing more important in this world than being okay with who you are when you are by yourself. Relationships are good because you get the privilege and the chance to influence someone's life positively. And that person, by the way they interact with you, give you the chance to develop yourself, either because they expose something in you where you're not free and you're attached to a fixed position, and then you learn that from someone, or you simply genuinely learn something new that you want to learn, right? On a topic that you already know enough about and you just want to continue learning. But relationships are amazing at that, and we should facilitate this kind of unfiltered way of interacting with each other for the shared good, right? For the greater good. Everyone is winning. I love the real win-win strategies in which all interactions give you something in return. There is no wasted time. There is no um, there is no, you know, good versus bad way of spending time if you decide up front that you will make the most out of any kind of time spent in any certain way, right? It's always your decision to have the biggest return on anything. If it's a bad experience, if you interact with bad people, you learn something about yourself and the kind of relationships or activities you want to have more of or less of in the future. You learn important lessons from everything. And then all these learnings you can then leverage to then grow the relationships that you genuinely care about the most, where you are acting as a model with or without your will for those people, right? I'm talking about family mostly. So it's a privilege. Relationships are a privilege. they reflect a lot about who you are and what you are about in the world. And I genuinely believe that we can all learn from each other for the greater good, to learn a lot about ourselves, but also about how we can serve others, right? All the best.